Away from that, the Media Foundation for West Africa says there were about 120 ethical violations in the media during its recent media monitoring. The 2-week study between June 15 and 30 found that hosts of pro-partisan radio stations incited violence and threatened people who belong to the opposing party. Let me bring you more details on that report, especially on the methodology. It was done using a qualitative content analysis and assessed the content of 26 media organizations. Akan language radio stations were chosen, 10 of them, 10 newspapers and 6 news websites, and we'll be delving more into the findings of that particular study. Program Officer of the Media Foundation for West Africa, Kweku Krobi Asante, joins me for more. Thank you so much for your time this morning, sir. Hello, if you can unmute, we'll be glad, because we are struggling to hear you.
Sorry, I was muted.
All right, okay, great to have you. Now, let me just find out from you, beyond the report, which has quite some interesting findings, you covered the period, as I mentioned, June 15 to 30. Out of the total of 963 media content programs, you determined that there were about 116 violations. They had to do with decency, allegations that were not verified, inciting violence. But the interesting point is that pro-party stations were the most culpable. Does it trouble you that this is what is on the ground? And despite this, we seem to be having more stations that are pro-party based?
Thank you for having me once again. And yes, it troubles us very much that the pro-partisan radio stations or media outlets happen to come up again and again. And this is supposed to be the second report when we started the monitoring exercise. On the first report, indeed, the pro-partisan radio stations came at tops in terms of the violation. And then this time we are seeing them again. There could be a lot of explanations or meanings to this, but whatever it is something that unsettles us. It is something that we think that has to be controlled as soon as possible.
In one instance, for example, you record in your report that a pro-party-based radio station called on the audience to destroy the machines being used for registration if they suspect any foul play by the EC. And this was after the Supreme Court had given a judgment on the voter registration case that the NDC had sent there. Beyond the report, have these findings been forwarded to the appropriate courts? Because this goes beyond just caution, doesn't it?
Yes, we think that as much as we agree that it goes beyond caution, we think that the first step is perhaps doing this exercise, putting their names out, naming the people who are doing it, and then showing the kind of principles that they are breaking. Indeed, this is part of a bigger project where we are working together with the media regulatory bodies, the media association, so the GIBA at some point, the GJ at some point, the National Media Commission at some point, even the Peace Council, knowing that around these times when we are heading towards the elections, these ethical principles, as much as they are media-related issues, are also issues relating to peace and stability. And so, yes, we are working with all these organizations to ensure that these issues are controlled and are brought down to its barest forms that we can have it.
So this particular report, have complaints been made to the NMC, for example?
So we released this report just yesterday, and so we are in conversations with them. In fact, they are part of this whole project that we are doing. It's part of our elections project. As you may know, we have a language monitoring project ongoing. This is media ethics, and these are things that we do in conjunction with the National Media Commission and then the other bodies that matter. So yes, we are going to work with them, particularly on this report, to help us bring these violations down.
Now, in your report, again, you mention host and programs with the highest ethical violations. And so we know the programs, we know the stations, and we know the persons involved. Have you or any of the organizations you're working with tried reaching out, or is there a plan to reach out to these stations or the persons involved in particular?
Yes, we have a much comprehensive plan of working with all these media outlets, even beyond the people we are monitoring. We think that these are hotspots, media hotspots that control the public opinion, shape thoughts, getting towards the election. So the first step after we do this report, we share with all the media contacts, including these media outlets that we are monitoring, to say, this is what we have done so far, and this is how your media organization is faring in terms of ensuring ethical principles. As we go ahead, we are going to call for all these figureheads, editors in the newsrooms and the media organizations to come down, presenting these reports that we have done to them, to say, this is how far your organizations are faring. What is your commitment to ethics? What is your commitment to peace? What is your commitment to issues and not insults ahead of the elections and beyond? So it's part of a plan. This is the second report we have put out. As we move on, we are going to bring all these people together to hold a conversation and to engender discussions towards building peace and stability, and ensuring that these ethical principles are upheld, and then the abuse of language is reduced.
Away from the radio stations, for news websites, you found that there were unscreened or unregulated comments published below stories, and some readers of the news were engaged in invectives and peddling unsubstantiated allegations. What would your recommendation be for dealing with this problem?
Okay, and I think that perhaps at this point I have to say that your own news website, My John Online, happens to be one of the culprits of this. So when the news reports are published on the website, they leave the comment section, which often comes immediately below the news stories, unregulated. That's where people come in there to peddle falsehood, to make unsubstantiated allegations, to trade in invectives and insults, and you realize that the editors pay no attention to these places. They don't screen, they don't edit as much as they pay attention to the story. So our recommendation is that perhaps it's about time that the editors also pay attention to this comment section. Whether you like it or not, it appears on your website. There's a web link that leads to these insults. And so it's part of what you are allowing others to see as part of the gatekeeping rule. If you are failing in that, then perhaps you are failing even in the whole process of publishing a story. So whatever comments that appear on your website, we deem it to be a comment that an editor has seen and allows it to be there. So our recommendation is that they have to pay attention, look at them, regulate those contents. The one that they think it's not right, perhaps they have to reach out to whoever is making, or take actions to make sure that the comment section, as much as the news story itself, are decent, consistent with the ethical principles that guides all of us.
What would you say to someone who says that, oh, you say that your highest violated principle is decency, but decency, really, what's the potential of decency to derail development or to affect, the peace we enjoy in this country? What would you tell someone who holds that notion?
Well, perhaps the person would need to understand what decency as a principle means. And indeed, in the report, in the statement we release, we give a link to the principles as it has been explained, so that anybody who wants to go ahead to read what decency would mean would understand. But since you brought it up, let me quickly explain. Decency, brings into fore a lot of things. So insults, certain things that we call unprintable, unethical statement, abusive language in any form of it comes under decency. So somebody can say the worst of things you know, in that category, and it comes under decency. So decency is really a big issue that we have to pay attention to. They are not just, you know, something that we think is decent or is indecent, but all forms of insults, all forms of abusive language are forms of decency that comes under that category.
Finally, what informed your decision to focus on only Akan-speaking radio stations? Okay,
to start with, this is about the third time we are doing this media ethics project. Since 2012, we've been doing this project. And from our experience and from the lessons and recommendations we have made from the previous ones, it stands out that the Akan-speaking radio stations, when compared with the English-speaking ones, have a lot of violations. There seem to be a way that these Akan language radio stations breach or violate the ethical principles as compared with the English-speaking radio stations. And so we think that if indeed we are looking for where we can find violations to control, if we are looking for where infractions of ethics happen, it is the Akan language radio stations that we have to pay attention to.
Thank you very much for your time this morning. Kweku Asante is Program Officer at the Media Foundation for West Africa, and we've been discussing their latest report on ethical violations in the media.